Let me tell you just a couple of other things about me that also might be pertinent but don't show up in my professional bio. One is that I am the mother of three young adult children. They're currently 25, 28, and 32. And the 32-year-old is a software engineer for Google. She works on their privacy team. So I have a little bit of insider knowledge sometimes about what's happening in terms of the kind of cutting edge of digital culture, because we all know Google is king when it comes to that kind of thing. Amazon is a close second. Uh, um, and I'm also, I spent 11 years as a local church pastor before I became a seminary professor full time. So I spent time working in children's ministry in particular and some pastoral visitation as well as a sole pastor of a small church. So when I think about these kinds of things, I'm thinking with the heart of the pastor, the heart of a parent, and the heart of a professor, all of those things coming together. Now, I'm going to be speaking twice today, and you'll notice that my title for this first is focused on opportunities that digital culture offers for individuals and families with regard to faith. Never fear, I picked up on the suspicion of digital culture that seems to be present here. So tonight we'll talk about challenges. We will get to those challenges, and I will name a little bit of that even this morning. But I do want to start with the positive, because that's a good way for us to think about things that perplex us. Digital culture is contested space when it comes to thinking about how spirituality is connected to online life. On the one hand, the internet offers potential tools for spiritual formation that contemporary children and youth already accept as everyday aspects of their life, and they use digital tools with ease. On the other hand, online activities are under fire as potential destroyers of interpersonal intimacy and social communication. This ambivalence about the value or threat of digital culture as a spiritually formative space is exacerbated by a lack of explicit research on the spiritual effects of online participation. Some scholars and practitioners in the social sciences, most notably MIT psychologist Sherry Turkle in her 2011 book Alone Together, have theorized that digital technology appears to draw people closer, and yet it actually promotes distance and disconnection. Numerous studies have been conducted by social sciences and public health professionals worldwide that address the perceived cultural ills of digital culture. Things like cyberbullying, sexting, and gaming violence. And we'll talk about some of that tonight. But I want to begin by pointing out just how widespread digital culture is in the US in particular, but really around the world. So here's a few numbers that are actually already 2 years out of date, because they come from February 2018. The number of internet users in the US, 293 million. We have, according to my quick check this morning via Google, 331 million people in the US as of February 2020. So 293 million 2 years ago, that number probably has broken 300 million at this point. The number of available Wi-Fi locations in the US, 152,069, and growing every time they put up a new Starbucks. And internet coverage in the US, the degree to which the entire country is saturated with internet access, that number was a little over 87% in 2018. My guess is that it's much closer now to 100%. I live part of the time out in rural Virginia. Sometimes I'm in Richmond, but sometimes I'm out in Louisa. And just last fall, we finally got reliable internet, even on Lake Anna in Louisa County. So it's that kind of saturation. You really can't go much of anywhere anymore and not be able to get online. If you think about how we use the internet, well, at least some of us use it for communication, for obtaining information, for job searching. It's really hard to look for a job nowadays without having an online profile, and for participating in a world economy. It's rare to meet someone who's never ordered anything online, or in the case of my 77 and 81-year-old parents, had one of their children order something for them online. Just 10% of US adults say that they do not use the internet, and 41% say that they actually use the internet several times a day. That's compared to just 8% who say they access the internet just once a day, maybe to read email. The chart I've got up here is actually a generational breakdown starting in 2000 and moving through 2018. Again, these are the most recent statistics we tend to have access to. And then looking at different age groups. You'll notice even in the 65 plus age group, the number in 2000 was 14%. The number in 2018 is 66%. And sometimes I think that's not so much because older adults, although there are some who use it quite robustly, are really comfortable in digital culture. But if you have a grandchild and you want to keep up with what's going on in that child's life, particularly if they don't live locally, you're probably on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram in order to see their posts. Or if you want to receive photos, or if you want to be able to video chat. This is the ways that even those 65 plus are using um, digital culture. The number for the 18 to 29-year-olds was 72% in 2000, and it's now up to 98%. So really almost all young people. Internet use via computers, cell phones, tablets, Fitbits, or other kinds of exercise kinds and watches are much more commonplace among children and youth. I'm actually not a typical user of so many things, being in my mid 50s. But for those who are under 40, it's ubiquitous in their lives. It's no longer viewed as just one communication tool among many options. Instead, it's become a primary and necessary mode of communication among adolescents in particular. A 2011 Pew Research study found that 95% of US teens were internet connected. And a more recent study suggests that US children as young as 9 years old subscribe to social media sites such as Facebook, despite the fact that Facebook has a minimum age requirement of 13 years. And they do that with their parents' permission and assistance. All you have to do is fake the birth year. What then are the most popular social networking sites that people are using? Well, despite what you've heard about Facebook's decline, and certainly all the other negative publicity and people saying they're going to get off Facebook, when I looked at these statistics just a couple of months ago, Facebook is still by far the largest social media use. 171.25 million users a day. Next is Instagram with 123, a little over 123 million. Facebook Messenger, because it gets counted separately, with almost 108 million. Pinterest, for all you crafty folks, is at 66.46 million. Snapchat, almost 49 million. And then Reddit, WhatsApp, Tumblr, Hangouts, Google Hangouts, and Skype all come in at something lower than that. And I haven't even listed all of the possibilities, but my pie chart was running out of room. So people are using these forms of social media, particularly on their smartphone, as a way to engage with others. And whether we really like it or not, it is part of how life works nowadays. So let's look a little bit at what some people say they don't like, which I'll come back to tonight, but then at some of the opportunities for use. I do a lot of research on children, youth, and young adults in relation to digital culture. And often what I find is adults talking about how worried they are that digital culture is going to have a negative effect on children, youth, and young adults. There are social scientists, there are public health workers, there are educators, all of whom are emphasizing the myriad risks they see involved in online activities. From the potential for contamination from malicious codes like spyware or viruses or phishing expeditions, which really tends to trap more adults than young people, but again, to psychosocial dangers like addiction, sexual predation, pornography, harassment, which does occur, but not nearly at the levels we tend to believe. In fact, stories of cyberbullycide, a suicide that follows online harassment, tend to sort of up the ante in terms of our negativity towards digital culture, because then it seems like digital culture is even a physical threat to young people's well-being. Researchers have characterized the internet as a place where companies take advantage of children through direct marketing, like nobody else does that. And young people can potentially spoil their reputations and their lives by posting things that then are seen by college admissions counselors or others who might make judgments. And again, this also happens with adults. Some social scientists and others put forth a kind of displacement theory that time spent on media takes people away from human interaction and breaks down social connections and community. Of course, we've got some research that actually suggests the opposite, which is that people who spend time connecting on social media actually spend more time connecting offline with the same people. But our perception is that this is displacing what's happening. Others stress the absence of adult supervision on social media sites as a reason we ought to be concerned. Cyberbullying is touted as an international public health concern among adolescents that's in need of immediate attention. All of these particular claims are being sensationalized by public media outlets because they make good news. And they're also used to justify the redirection of public funds to research and prevention programs that are aided at addressing this societal ill, and which takes them away from other, much more significant kinds of concerns, like general health care. So let's think about an alternative view to this sort of threat narrative that we might use when we think about digital culture. And that's to think about our life as a life that is lived fast and lived slow. And I think this came up yesterday evening. We have a rhythm of life. And it's a common religious understanding that this rhythm of life requires us to move and be productive at certain times and to take rest and to focus on purpose and meaning at other points. That's the whole Sabbath rhythm that many of us know. It also fits with ideas of praying the hours or other ways of marking the day, where we might pause in our busyness to attend to God's presence more directly, more substantively. And in some traditions, that's done in the morning, at midday, in the evening, through praying the hours. Psychologists also endorse this idea of a healthy rhythm, times of being on and times of having downtime, taking a break. To be healthy and effective in today's digital world, we need to mix fast, high-tech times and slow, reflective modes of being. And one of the ways we can do this is by thinking about how mindfulness or centering prayer type practices help us with this. Mindfulness, when it's used in a kind of psychological or social science sense, has to do with choosing what we're going to pay attention to in our lives. And being mindful helps us determine what it is that we value. It's kind of like, the saying that where your money is, that's where your values are. Well, where your attention is, That's also where your values are. If we're not mindful about where we put our attention, then we find ourselves wandering lost in a digital landscape that can easily overwhelm us. And so it's helpful to think about how attention works. All of us have multiple forms of giving attention. One form is focused attention, the kind I hope you're giving to me now, where you're really selecting this task of sitting and hearing a presentation and taking in what's said. But at the same time, if there were to be a book that dropped or someone sneezed, you would hear and notice that as well. That's the open attention that we all also have. Parents are particularly aware of this kind of attention. It's the kind of attention that you can be doing whatever it is you are, cooking dinner, talking with a spouse or a friend, and suddenly you realize it's gotten too quiet because you were kind of listening to the noise of the children, not really paying close attention, but you were aware of it, and so you notice when it ceases. And you will change your focused attention to figuring out why it has ceased before you come back to whatever you're doing. So we engage in focused attention. We have this open attention where we're aware of what's going on around us. And most of the time, we're in mixed mode. We're somewhat focused on the task at hand, but we're also open to what might be going on around us. The challenge then in being mindful about our attention is determining when we need to shift our direct focus. When do we need to turn our attention to something else? And since digital culture can offer myriad interruptions, we have to determine how we're going to manage those interruptions. Are we going to have an audible signal that tells us when we've gotten a message, whether it's a text or an email? Are we going to use the alarm setting function on our phone to remind us when we need to move on to something else, or that it's time to go to chapel, or it's time to go pick up the kids, or whatever that might be? Those are two different kinds of interruptions, one perhaps more productive, one less so. So we need to think about what we want to do there. There's actually been so much struggle around this that a college professor developed with a group of students a kind of approach to mindful tech. The professor is David Levy. I don't remember where he taught, but he had noticed that his students were struggling with this kind of thing. And so he said, let's think about a kind of process of being mindful. Interesting to me, this seems to be a whole lot like the way the monastics often encouraged attention to how we spend our time and energy. And so he said, we can't change these external conditions. We can't change the fact that we have digital culture and that it wants to interrupt our lives frequently, but we can change our reactions to or relations to these kinds of interruptions. And how do we go about doing that? Well, we engage in some kind of a technological activity like email or texting or mobile apps, or whatever it might be that we want to do, watching streaming videos, whatever kind of thing we want to do. And we observe what's happening, not only how we feel about what we're doing, but what's happening in our bodies when we're doing it. If we're reading posts on social media and our bodies are starting to clench up because we are anxious, angry, upset by what we're seeing, we notice that. If we're interacting with friends or family members who are far away on those same social media sites and we're feeling more relaxed and we're kind of laughing out loud a bit and we're thinking up what we want to say and when we'll next get to see them, we notice that. We notice how our bodies are reacting. We notice our feelings. We log these things, or keep a running list or diary so we can look back at them. And then at some point, usually after about a week, we look back over our notations and we summarize what we've noticed over time. Are there certain activities that tend to make us feel good about ourselves, make our bodies feel relaxed and happy? Are there certain activities that we can feel our blood pressure going up? That's when this is really helpful because it monitors my blood pressure as well as knowing how many steps I've taken. And it can tell time too. um, and having noticed these different things, then you create your own personal guidelines, kind of like a rule of life for digital culture, where you say, these things that tend to get me anxious or angry or frustrated, I'm going to do those at times where I can create some space in which I engage it and help keep myself calmer. Or I'm going to do less of that. That's why some people take social media fasts for Lent. And right now in election season, not a bad idea. But you come up with a rule or a set of guidelines that you want to use, and then you share and discuss those with other people so they can help you remain accountable to your rules, whatever you might want them to be. In that way, then, you have a kind of practice of engaging with digital culture that works well for your well-being. Now, I also have been looking specifically at what does this mean for children, and how is it that we address this? And Jody Gold, who's a child and adolescent psychiatrist and a mother of 3, has written a great book called Screen Smart Parenting, in which she takes this sort of positive but proactive approach to digital culture with her children and for other children. And one of the things that she has said is that children need to be resilient online. They need to be able to take care of themselves when they are engaging online materials. Kind of like when we taught children how to read stereotypes in television shows or how to recognize marketing ploys in advertising in various places. So we need to help them develop that kind of online resilience. And we also need them to become digital citizens so that they can use digital tools to help take care of the world around them. And we have already seen many examples of young people who have used social media to rally support for social causes in positive ways. To be a good digital citizen is to have responsible and appropriate tech use. It's not to avoid tech use, but to learn how to do it responsibly and appropriately. And so to assist in that, Dr. Gold has suggested that we teach our children a digital citizenship pledge, which we ourselves are willing to take. And that pledge goes like this: I pledge my commitment to upholding the values of digital citizenship. I pledge to take care of myself, others, and my community. I pledge to be mindful and thoughtful of what I say and post online. I pledge to use technology as a tool to improve both myself and my community. I pledge to use the power of the internet and social media to spread kindness and philanthropy around the world. I pledge to uphold the digital golden rule, to do unto others as I would want them to do unto me. Now, when I go and sit with children in congregations and I share this digital citizenship pledge with them and I say, we talk about each line, what do you think it means? They are full of exciting, positive ideas for how to implement this kind of pledge. They're excited about the possibility of being able to make a change in the world through using digital technology. And of course, many of them are quite a bit better at using it than many of us. So it's fun to listen to them in terms of that. Now, I will ask them when I sit in a congregation, what other things have you learned in church that you might add to this? Or what language would you use for some of that, particularly if I'm talking with children in 4th, 5th grade and up. And they will begin to tell me how different Bible stories they've learned, how different values that they've been taught in church, how they can also be fit into this. So sometimes we rewrite this digital citizenship pledge so that it's a Christian digital citizenship pledge that's explicit there. But this becomes a starting point. What are some ways that we can promote this online resilience that Dr. Gold is talking about? Well, she's got a whole list of possibilities that we can think through. And so you can kind of enter into this list any place that you feel comfortable. The first is to talk about both good and bad TV or streaming media in terms of the values that we have for our entertainment. Um, any shows that they want to watch, well, it's a good idea for us to have seen something of them or to have at least read about them and to be able to talk about the stereotypes, the assumptions that underlie those. One of the things that I try to do, since I, of course, am of a certain generation who knows certain kinds of shows, they seem to be remaking all of them lately, is that I try to watch things that I hear a lot of buzz about so that I know what they're like. And then I have an opinion about what's good or bad about them. So I encourage you to think about that as well. To help children distinguish between fantasy and reality. So much of what we see on any form of media is in part fantasy. It's a projection of someone's idea. And they recognize that there are differences between fantasy and reality, particularly if they're roughly 9 years old or above. But they're not always sure when they see something depicted if it's real or not. So to be able to name something as, oh, that's somebody's imagination versus, oh, that seems to be an accurate portrayal of what happens is a skill that we can help them with. To challenge the stereotypes that they see online and on TV. I'll never forget the time that my oldest child commented to me as we were walking through a mall and we were going by the Disney store right after the movie Pocahontas came out. And my children went to a Quaker school in Cambridge, Massachusetts at the time. And evidently there'd been conversation going on about this movie because my oldest daughter, as we walked by the store, said loud enough for the Disney store employee standing at the door greeting people to hear, "Mom, did you know Pocahontas is a stereotype?" And then we proceeded to walk in the store. But helping children to recognize the stereotypes that are perpetuated and reinforced. Because one of the things we do know about digital culture is that it tends to mirror the kinds of perspectives that offline culture also presents to children. It's not challenging them particularly, it's simply replicating them. So helping them see those things. Similarly, talk about media depictions of violence and focus on how various characters would feel if they are engaging in or receiving this kind of violence. And what does that mean? Try to humanize characters so that children can see the problems with media depictions of violence. Teach critical assessment of advertising images and messages. Nowadays, one of the great ploys of advertising is to actually unmask the fact that they're trying to play you. And they're using that to make you then trust them. We need to unmask the unmasking because this is yet another advertising ploy. Pointing to the ways in which movies have all kinds of marketing tie-ins. I just watched Frozen 2 this last week, and I loved Frozen, but Frozen 2 just seems like it was developed to sell products and prove that some people can sing. And beyond that, I'm not sure there was a plot there. I'm sorry if you love Frozen, but but I was very disappointed because it really did seem like Elsa had to have a new dress, and that seems to be the major reason she had a costume change. I can't, they need to sell a new doll, probably with a horse. If you haven't seen the movie, see the movie, and then you'll know why the horse. But helping them to assess these kinds of things. Help them assess the credibility and authenticity of websites. There are certain websites you can go to check whether what you're seeing is an accurate portrayal. So looking up things, figuring out who's behind a particular website becomes an important skill. So going and looking at the about page, not just the home page, to see who it is that's running it through one of these fact checker websites will do that. Um, we should, and I have in the past, require our children to let us follow them if they are on a social media site. Now, that isn't to say that they couldn't create a different profile that you don't know about, but it's actually rather rare. Yes, there are always children and teens, young adults who will try that. Some are just more rebellious than others, but most are going to be comfortable with that, or at least understand it's a condition of their being able to be on there. That doesn't mean we need to embarrass them by posting things that they would find uncomfortable, just like when we say things in front of their friends they find uncomfortable. But we do need to be able to see their social media site, and they should know we're doing that. Similarly, if we have a social media site, we should allow them to friend us. And we should be aware that they're then watching what we do on that site. Anytime they make a mistake on their social media site, we should turn those mistakes into a teachable moment and to try to avoid punishment unless this has been an ongoing teaching moment that they haven't learned the lesson, and then we might have to have some negative consequences. But they often are trying things out that they've seen or heard other people have done, and they don't always get it right. They don't always realize that something that they say is hurtful. And so they need to learn how to apologize and correct online mistakes, which is the next item on the list. You know, how can you go back in? How can you remove something? Yes, we know it doesn't really go fully away, but it disappears from public view, and that may be enough for small mistakes. And we need to always keep an open communication line about online activities and concerns. One of the things I'm most frustrated by when I go into congregations is how often in older children's classes or youth groups, they will collect all the cell phones at the door in a basket and pretend they don't exist until the children or youth go home. And so there's no modeling how these tools might be used or ways in which they might connect people. They're treated as if they don't belong in church. Well, that message isn't exactly going to open up young people to talking about their digital culture participation in religious settings. So if we want them to think about it as a spiritual tool, we need to encourage them to have it with them and to use it in particular kinds of ways. And I want to talk about what some of those ways might look like. One of the things that is very easy to do with any kind of digital tool that can chime or buzz or in another way alert you is to kind of adopt that as a way of practicing the presence of God, an ancient monastic practice from the 4th, 5th century forward, where a particular sound, oftentimes it was the church bells chiming because towns had those everywhere, but a particular sound became an alert for a moment of prayer, a kind of breath prayer or simple prayer in which you recalled God's presence in your life. And every time you heard that sound, you would offer this short prayer. It could be something as simple as, God, you are with me and I give you thanks. Or, Lord, have mercy on me, or whatever a person chose. And there were different ones that were promoted at different points. Some people use this kind of thing already when they hear a siren and they pray for the person that siren might be approaching, who's in need in some way. But it becomes a way of taking an interruption and making it a spiritual reminder. And I've suggested this to a number of young people who've said, oh, that way I have something else to do besides look at my phone. My first thought is not look at my phone. My first thought with a little practice is offer my prayer and then look at my phone. In some cases, with youth in particular, a group might choose to share their prayers on social media. So, as a part of their prayer, they would then send that prayer with a hashtag for whatever their groups decided through Twitter, or to post an image of what they're seeing when they're praying through Instagram. And in that way, to incorporate the use of social media, not just with the alert, but also with a posting in that way. And it becomes a way of modeling for others this sort of attention to God. There are also a number of different resources online that we can use to support our spiritual lives. And I know when we were asked who had actually posted something on social media last night, very few people stood up. But how many of you have read something online in the last 48 hours? All right. So we may not be posters, but we are readers or attenders to things. I want to talk about some of the different kinds of materials that there are online that we and young people can use. And one of my favorites are the various daily reflection kinds of materials. This particular one that I have up here is from Society of St. John the Evangelist, which is a Cambridge Episcopal Brotherhood. And they have Brother Give Me a Word, which is a daily word Monday through Saturday with a short meditation on that word that can be delivered to you via automatic email, e-push, at, I think it comes in at about 5 a.m. every day. Or you can go to their Facebook page, Society of St. John the Evangelist, and see it there. But they are providing a way for people to have a word to carry through the day. So you can just read it once and meditate for a couple of minutes, or you can go back to it over the course of the day since you have it available to you all day long. But it becomes a word to consider. It's a little bit like those calendars that try to teach you vocabulary, only this is theological vocabulary that we're doing. Similarly, during certain seasons, there are other materials that are related to going through the season. And one that just began is Signs of Life. It's also Society of St. John the Evangelist, which is a video-based and daily kind of piece through Lent. So they are providing a weekly video that's about 15 minutes long. This week's was on light. And then because, they want to see how many people they can draw in, they're now adding their Brother Give Me a Word. They're using a word that connects to whatever their weekly theme is. So today's was looking at light, and this was the reflection. One of the things I love about St. John's Gospel is how it is shot through with a dialectic between darkness and light. From the beginning of the prologue, John makes it clear that the light shines in the darkness. Even though the darkness is there, light will always overcome that darkness. And then it adds, during Lent, a daily practice. And today's practice is, Jesus says, I am the light of the world. Where is the light in your life? Then you can, of course, share your response on Facebook or on their website to the daily piece. So looking for short seasonal resources is a good way to introduce people to this kind of material if they're not so sure that they want to take on a daily process. Visual meditations are also something that digital culture can provide for us in a way that might be harder for us to access those sorts of materials. The Visual Faith Project has a practice where it guides people through imagery into deeper faith formation. And one can use the images alone to reflect on what God might be saying through an image, like the hallway and stairway, or the grapes, or the keys. Or one can pair these images with scripture. And the website, the Visual Faith Project, provides scriptures to go with many of the images that they have, to consider how the text and the images shape our thinking about God and living in God's way. Reflecting on images can be as simple as asking yourself one or more of the following questions. What story does this image tell me? What emotions surface as I consider this image? Where might God be in this image? What might God be inviting me to do through this image? These questions are similar to those used in Lectio Divina, or Holy Reading, to reflect on short passages. And if a picture really is worth 1,000 words, then there's an awful lot to reflect on in an image. I've noted two different websites, and I'm realizing there's a lot of light coming in, so it may be hard to see. I'll be happy to share these with you individually if you'd like as well. But one is this Visual Faith Project, and the other is a website that's curated by a Methodist pastor who has an image meditation gallery. Her name's Shireen MacArthur. I actually went to college with her, and she offers various kinds of resources as a spiritual director there. Um, One of those kinds of resources that she and others offer are digital spirituality online retreats, where if you don't have time or means to get away to a retreat center, you can actually retreat online with others who are also retreating online and do comments or share, have conversations through discussion forums there. Shireen, who I mentioned before, has been working on a series of retreats that think about Jesus' incarnation and how he was viewed by others. And so the materials that she and others like her provide often include some kind of an audio podcast as a story or meditation, a set of reflection questions, some other materials like images or music or articles that will support the reflection process, and then an opportunity, whether it's by writing comments or whether it's meeting in a synchronous video kind of conference with others to share your thoughts and experiences with others who are engaged in the retreat. And materials like this can be used over time. One can take an hour every week to do a retreat, or it could be a day that you set aside in your own house or in a friend's house if you need to escape your household for a bit. And you could work through it over the course of the day. But they're designed to allow people who usually think of the online as the busy, hurry up space of their life to actually discover that they can be quiet and reflective in that space as well. Developing and maintaining a social networking profile is also, or could be, a spiritual practice. Because when we create a social media profile, we're experimenting with a sort of creation of the self. And we could think about that as creating the kind of self that we want to be and to live into, much like what the Apostle Paul means when he says that we need to put away our old sense of self and become a new creature. Paul also contends that personal transformation is a difficult and complicated task that demands careful attention to the degree that what we will is actually what we do. And a social media profile can be a place where we will and do what we want to do. Finally, the Apostle Paul also explains that how one presents the new self is often context specific, and that a person should consider how the self will be received by others and shape his or her presentation accordingly. How very digital culture of him. Just a note, those are tasks that I have taken from Ephesians 4, Romans 7, and 1 Corinthians 8. Constructing a digital profile then requires careful self-reflection if we want it to be a spiritually robust persona. We have to consider how we want to be known, and we might alter our self presentation in response to likes and comments that others leave on our digital walls. Not because we want them to dictate what we do, but because we realize how they're perceiving what we're doing, and we don't want to cause them to stumble. In making choices about the various online components, like our name, our relationship status, our affiliations, our list of favorites, we have to make judgments about what signifiers will best convey the self that we want people to see in us. And in response to concerns about online bullying or potential stalkers, catfishing, lurking by possible social connections like employers and college admissions officers and church staff, we have to consider limiting some elements of our self presentation so that we can be in conversation with these people. All of these kinds of tasks develop skills of attentiveness, self-construction, and social analysis that can also be transferred back into our everyday offline context of faith formation. They cultivate an awareness of what it means to become a self, to be a disciple, to be formed by choices that we make. And they also cultivate greater awareness of the dissonance and the consonance between our offline and online identities. As we receive feedback from people about how we seem to be a different person online than we are when we're just hanging out, or we seem to be much nicer online than we are in person. In fact, one of the myths, which again we'll talk some more about tonight, is that people didn't have masks or personas that hid their real self in face-to-face interactions. Yeah. I don't know about you, but the people I go to church with seem to all be perfect. At least that's what they present about their lives. And then you learn that no, they're in pain. No, there's so much else going on. But we are always making choices about how we present ourselves to people, whether we're doing that online or offline. And what this notion of digital spirituality as a place that we can refashion the self as disciples of Christ can do is it can make us more aware of how much of that refashioning of the self in terms of kind of protecting our reputation in a way that hides the self we're already doing in our offline lives. Now, I may not have convinced you that you all need to go out and get a Facebook profile if you don't already have one, but I would like you to think about the ways in which the digital culture can be a rich place of exploring spirituality. Not without dangers, but then neither is the offline world without dangers, but a place where if we're attentive and mindful to how we engage it, and if we are attentive and mindful in walking through that space with young people, we actually become more aware of who we are outside of digital culture in the so-called real world as we are aware of what we're doing online. And that is something that young people have taught me because they know they're constructing a self online. What they don't know as well is that they're constructing one offline too. So we can help make those connections. And with that, my digital device tells me it's 12:29, and so it's time to stop for lunch.